Good morning, evening, and afternoon from wherever in the world you're joining us today, and welcome to this SpunkGo webinar. Today's speaker is one that I am excited about, especially, and this is Matt Abrahams. Matt, it is a great honor that you're here today and to have one of the leading academians in cognitive planning, persuasion, and communication here to speak with us. Matt is a lecturer at the Stanford Graduate School of Business and has currently released his third edition of the book, Speaking Without Freaking, and runs the podcast Think Fast, Talk Smart. It is my greatest honor to welcome Matt to talk about effective communication. Just a side note, Q&A will be done to the chat feature, but he will answer questions after his presentation. And with that, the floor is now all yours, Matt.
Thank you so much. I am honored to be here with all of you. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I am excited to be here. So my plan is to spend some time today talking about how we can be better in our communication so we can reap all of the benefits that exist. You see my email address there. I'll put this up at the end. If I can be of service to any of you when we are done, please let me know. So today I intend to cover 4 best practices that will help you be better in any communication situation that you find yourself in. Before we start though, I'd like for us to do a quick activity. I'd like for all of you to look at this sentence. And what's more important to me than reading the sentence is I'd like for you to count the number of F's, the letter F. How many F's do you find in this sentence? And what I'd like you to do is to go to the chat and type in the number that you find. If you find 2, you'll type in 2. If you find 7, you'll type in 7. I'm going to give you 3 or 4 seconds. Please go ahead and type in how many you find. I'll be quiet for a second to let you do this. I'm seeing numbers come in. 3, 4, 3, 5, 7. Seeing some variety. 2. Give you another moment or two. All right, we're seeing quite a bit of our variety, which is exciting to see. Excellent. Well, let me share with you how many there are. There are 6 F's in this sentence. Many of us, myself included, were not as accurate as we could have been. Why? We miss little things that make a big difference. The F's that people tend to miss are the ofs. There are 3 ofs here. Once you see those, you now begin to see all the F's. So why do I do this? Why do I start every session I ever teach with this activity? It's quite simple. This is an analogy for what we all do in our communication. We miss little things that make a big difference in being effective. So today I intend to share with you 4 best practices to help you be more effective in your communication. These best practices include how do we start and focus our communication? How do we structure our communication to make it easier for people to understand? Then we'll talk about a very valuable skill, paraphrasing. How do we engage when people are talking to us? And then finally, I want to give you some best practices around how you actually show up, not what you say, but how you say it. If you are in a position for that last topic, I'm going to ask you to turn on your cameras if possible, because I'd like to show you some and give you some direct feedback. We need not do that now, although I'm happy to see you now. But towards the end of my talk, I would love to be able to see those of you who are comfortable and able to turn on your cameras. So let's go ahead and get started. To begin, I suggest that most people start their communication in the wrong place. Most people start any communication by saying, here is what I want to say. I, as the speaker, here are the things I want to get across. And I would argue that that's exactly the wrong place to start from. Rather, you should be thinking, what do I need my audience to hear? So it's not about you, it's about them. So we have to think about our audience and who they are and what they need from us. So there are 3 main questions I want you to ask yourself about your audience. First, how much do they know? Do they know a lot or a little about what I'm speaking on. In Zoom, there is a reactions feature. I'd like you to go to the bottom right-hand corner of Zoom, and I'd like you to click on the reactions button. And I want you to find that face that's the two circles for eyes and that one circle for a mouth. I want you to hit that button in a moment, not yet, if you have been in a situation where somebody was talking or teaching at you and they did not have the knowledge level right. In other words, they either got too detailed too quickly or they were too high level for you. Go ahead and click that if you've ever had that experience. Aha, I'm seeing a lot of these be selected. Many of you have had that experience. It doesn't feel good. It's hard. It's hard to stay focused. It's hard work to understand why the person is saying what they're saying. It is very important when you communicate that you think about the knowledge level of the person you're speaking to, and then you adjust and adapt your communication to that level. For example, if you're interviewing and you're talking to an interviewer and you're about to share with them some experience you have to think about, what do they know about what I'm sharing? Will they know a lot or a little? If they know a lot, then you can share straight away. If they know very little, then you need to give them additional information. So the very first thing we have to think about our audience is, what do they know relative to what we know? The second thing that we have to think about is, what are our audience's areas of resistance? Where might our audience be concerned about what we're saying? For example, are we advocating for something that they might think that costs too much money or will take us too much time? Or if you're interviewing, they might be worried that you have too little experience or you don't know enough about this one part of the job. So you have to think about areas of resistance so you can address them to help people feel more comfortable listening and acting on what you say. And then finally, you need to think about what motivates your audience. Because if you can link what you're saying to their motivations, they're much more likely to do it. So the very first thing you need to do before you communicate is to remember, it's not about you, it's about them. It's about your audience. What do they know? What are their concerns or areas of resistance? And what are their motivations? Those are the three concepts you must think about. Now, the question becomes, how do you learn this? Some of you are thinking, well, that makes sense, but I don't know anything about my audience. What can I do? Well, you have to do some research, reflection, and reconnaissance. You have to find that information out. In the chat, will you type in, what are some ways you could learn about the audience members you're speaking to? Maybe you're interviewing with somebody. How could you learn about that person? Maybe you're giving a presentation to people you don't know for a cause you support. How could you learn about them? In the chat, go ahead and type in ways that you could learn about your audience. I see some questions coming in. I'm going to take some questions later for sure. Syed says survey. So does Samina. Very good. Joria says you can look for facial expressions. That's when you're talking, sure. But what can you do in advance? Research the cause the audience has. Very good. You can, and that research you can often do online. So one of the things that you can do is you can look people up online. If you use LinkedIn, you can check them out. You can look for their companies or nonprofits they work for and read their biographies, their bios that they have. Yes, very good, Sharon. Go through their CVs. That's right. Go through the organization's website, says Brenda. Very good. Google, says Vasavi. Absolutely. These are all ways to learn about your audience, and you need to take that time to help you. Now, once you understand your audience, the next step is perhaps one of the most important steps in all communication, and that is to have a communication goal. I believe every important communication must be goal-driven. And by a goal, I mean three things. It's about information, emotion, and action. In other words, what do I want my audience to know? How do I want them to feel? And what do I want them to do as a result of my communication? So once you know your audience, the very next step is to think about, What do I want them to know when I'm done speaking? How do I want them to feel? And what do I want them to do? So knowing is the information you want them to have. Feeling is the emotion you want them to experience. Do you want them happy? Do you want them concerned? Do you want them motivated? Do you want them validated? Do you want them feeling confident? How do you want them to feel? We have known for a long, long time that emotion matters. We have a fast track into our brain. Emotion gets into our brain faster than information. We're more likely to focus on what the emotion brings, and we're more likely to act on it. So sometimes emotion is as important, if not more important, than information. So what's the emotion you want? And then finally, what is the action? What do you want your audience to do? Often when we communicate, there is a goal that we want people to act upon. Maybe it's giving us a donation, hiring us, setting up an interview for us. What is the action that we want? So let me give you an example. For this particular session I am leading right now, my goal is this. I would like for you all to leave knowing 4 best practices for your communication. I'd like you to feel confident in your ability to put these best practices into practice. And ultimately, I would like you to use some of these the next time you communicate. That's my know, feel, do. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask each of you to think about the next time you are going to communicate in front of others. Maybe it's in a school setting, maybe it's an interview, maybe it's at work. When is the next time you will be communicating? And I'm going to give you just a minute where I stop talking, and I'd like you to think about at the end of that communication, whatever it is, what do you want your audience to know? How do you want them to feel? And what do you want them to do? So think about that for a moment. Go ahead and maybe even write it down if it will help you. But do what I just did. Remember, I gave you my sentences for what this is about. I stated my goal. I want you to do the same. I'll stop talking for about a minute. I'm going to turn my timer on so you can actually do that thinking. And hopefully, you'll see the benefit of this. You should now all have a goal for your communication. The next thing that I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to think about how you put that information together, how you package up your information. This is very, very important. A lot of people, when they communicate, they just ramble on and on. So they just talk and they're discovering what they're saying as they're saying it. This can be very challenging for an audience to understand. So rather than just rambling, or worse, listing bullet points, some of you create slides where you just list ideas. That can be very challenging for your audience to learn. Our brains are set up to learn and listen to story, not lists of ideas. So we need to make sure that we package up our information in a way that helps our audience to understand. This is called structure and structuring information. Any of you who have been in school have learned different ways of structuring. If you have ever programmed a computer, you've learned a computer language that is structured. Certain things go in certain places. If you've learned mathematics, you know that there's certain structures to the equations that you solve. If you've learned how to write or tell stories, you learn that there's a structure, there's a beginning, a middle, an end. That's what we need to do with our communication. We need to structure it. There are many, many structures. My favorite structure in the entire world is what you see on the screen now. It is the what, so what, now what structure. Let me explain how this structure works. It starts by talking about what it is you are communicating. It might be your idea. It might be a product that you have. It might be a service that you're offering. It might be an answer that you're giving to a question. That's the what. The so what is why it is important to the person or people you are talking to. What's the value of it? What's the relevance? And then finally, the now what is what you do next. Maybe it's set up a different meeting. Maybe it's go ask questions. Maybe it is, let me show you a demonstration, or let me provide something to you. What, so what, now what is a great way of packaging your information. Again, it starts with what you're saying, then you explain why it's important, and then you explain what comes next. Now, why I like this structure is for many reasons. Let me share a few. First, it's 3 simple questions you have to remember: what, so what, and now what. Second, by simply answering those questions, you create your structure. Third, the structure is flexible. You can move pieces around. So if I have a highly resistant or hesitant audience, they're not sure about what I'm saying, I can actually move the so what first. So I start by talking about the so what, why this is important. And then I explain what it is and what comes next. So for example, imagine that you're being interviewed for a job, and somebody might be doubting your qualifications. Do you really know what you're talking about? So you could start your answer by saying, wouldn't it be great to have a few extra hours in every week? That's the so what. Well, I am somebody who is so efficient that I can get things done for you very quickly. That's the what. The now what is, I think you should consider hiring me. So you can use this structure to help you reduce resistance. What, so what, now what. When you write, when you speak, this is very helpful. Now, I'd like to take a moment to have what I call a reflection, a reflective moment. I want you to think about how I just taught you this structure. I actually used what, so what, now what to teach you what, so what, now what. I told you what the structure was, I told you why it was important, and I gave you examples of how you could use it next. This is an incredibly useful structure. I use it all the time in my teaching. In fact, I encourage all of you at the end of this call to be able to describe what you are interested in doing in this structure. So if you're interested in looking for a particular job, what's the job? Why are you qualified? Why would it be good for you? And what are the next steps that you could follow through to attain that job? If you're a student, think about a paper that you have to submit or some research that you have to do. It can be really, really helpful. I see some people are typing questions in. I want you to hold those questions. I'm going to come back to them. I see Kames has a question about conflict. I will take those questions in just a few moments. Once you have a structure that comes based on what you know about your audience and your goal, the next thing you have to do is you have to communicate that structure. And I call this your virtual presence, how you show up. So much of our communication now is online, like we're doing. I'd like to ask those of you who can to please turn on your cameras now, because I'd like to share with you some very specific information. So this is what I call your virtual presence. How do you show up? So it's one thing to have what you're saying. It's another thing to actually say it well. So there's what you're saying and there's how you're saying it. So I want to give you some best practices for how you show up. So if you can turn on your camera, I would love to see all 80 of you out there. I realize there's some reasons why turning on the camera might be difficult, but if you can, please do. So there are 3 things I want you to think about in terms of your non-verbal presence. That's how you show up. First and foremost, people need to be able to see you. They need to be able to see you. We like to see people's faces. We read a lot on people's faces. We learned a lot about this during the pandemic when people were wearing masks and covering up some of their face. When we can't see people's faces, it makes us a little nervous. So in order to be seen, you need to fill half the screen. Some of you are sitting so far away that I can't see your face. So we need to make sure that we sit so we can be seen. So I'm going to ask each of you to put up 4 fingers like I'm doing now. Do you see how I'm holding up 4 fingers? And I want you to put them on top of your head. I know it's silly. I ask people to do silly things, but you should only have four fingers worth of distance between your head and the top of your screen. If you find yourself putting multiple fingers, then you're too far away. So before you enter Zoom, when you enter Zoom, there is a button that says join. Before you click join, you see your image. Make sure you're filling half the screen like I am, like Sharon is, very good, like Sudi is, very good, like Cecil is. You're filling half the screen. That's excellent, very good. Now, the other thing we have to do is we have to make sure that we have enough light. We have to have enough light so you can be seen. Look at me, look at some of your colleagues. Some of you look like you are in the shadows. We want to make sure that people can see us. So try to position yourself near some light, maybe sunshine, maybe get a lamp. Some of you who know about ring lights, if you look in my glasses, you'll see I have one. You see how the light is reflecting in my glasses. Try to get yourself so people can see you. Because if we can't see you, it's hard for us to know if we can trust you. So we need to fill half the screen. The next thing I'd like for all of you to do is, many of us, when we are on screen, we slouch or we hunch or we make ourselves look small. I want you all to take your shoulders and pull them down. Do you see how I pull my shoulders down? That makes me look much more confident. That can really help. So Sharon, you look great. Nellie, excellent. Valentine, excellent. Mariah, very good. So these are ways that can help you look better in your communication. Again, if you have questions, I'm going to have you hold them just for a few more moments. So we want our shoulders down so we look more confident. So we fill half the screen, we pull those shoulders down. The next thing we must do is we have to look at the camera when we speak. Have you noticed that the whole time I'm talking to you, it's looked like I'm looking at you because I'm actually looking at the camera. Now I see lots of faces, so I might want to look at those faces. Zoom, for some reason, has decided to put Cecil and Valentine and Catherine, your pictures on the bottom of my Zoom screen. So if I'm looking at you right now, how does it look to you? It looks like I'm staring at your shoes. Rather, if I look at the camera, it looks like I'm looking at you. So you will look more confident and you'll look like you're paying attention. Now, this is very hard to do, especially when I know there are people looking down below on my screen and I'd love to see your faces. But when you speak, you must look at the camera so it looks like you're looking at the people you're talking to. So 3 fundamental skills for your presence, how you show up. First, fill half the screen and be well lighted. Second, look at the camera and make sure people see you looking at them. And third, pull those shoulder blades down to make sure you look confident. These are critical skills. Taken together, these skills that I have shared will help you be more effective in your communication. Now, I want to provide you with some resources before I take questions. So there are several things that I want to point you to that I hope will help. First, let me share with you these resources. First, I've written a book. It's called Speaking Up Without Freaking Out. It costs money. I think it's a good book. You do not need to get it if you do not want to. But I have 2 free resources, and I'm going to share some others in a moment that I'd like you to consider. One is a website that I curate, nofreakingspeaking.com. There are a tremendous number of resources that I have there that are mine and others. If you want to get better at your communication, please consider going there. Additionally, I host a podcast called Think Fast, Talk Smart, where all we do is talk about communication skills and how they can help you be better. In the chat, I have just put a link to an article that I wrote that covers everything that I've just said and more. So that might be something that you want to look at in the future. Again, I just put the no freaking speaking information in the website. There are two more things I want to provide with you before I take your questions. Let me just make sure I can find them. The website that I have is very useful, I hope. I also have, here's a link that I'm putting into the chat now. This is, that's not the link. Nope, that was the link. This is a link to the to the podcast that I host on YouTube. So it's very easy for you to get access to. And then finally, before I take your questions, I would love to stay in touch with you. If you are on the tool LinkedIn, feel free to link in with me. So now what I would like to do is I would like to take your questions. So there are two ways that I'd like to take your questions. First, if you have a question, feel free to type it into the chat. And we had a few questions there. Additionally, if you would like, you may raise your virtual hand, go to the reactions button, and I'll call on you and you can ask me your question. So I saw earlier a few questions there. Cami wrote a question, how can we use effective communication when in conflict with another person? I could talk forever about this question, but I'm going to give you some bits of advice. First and foremost, what is critical is that you listen to the other person. When there is conflict, the first step is to listen. Sometimes we make assumptions about what is motivating the person or what the person wants when we're in conflict. So by first listening, you might realize that you actually are not as apart as you thought you were. So the first step is to listen. The second step is to realize that solving conflict, addressing conflict, is about a problem to be solved. So when you are in conflict with somebody, think of it as a problem that together you can work on to solve. So conflict is not about me convincing you that I am right, or you convincing me that you are right. Rather, it is a problem that together we need to solve. So it's about making an invitation to coordinate, to talk, and then listening. So one of the best things you can do to resolve conflict is to listen first, and then make sure that you frame whatever the situation is as a problem that together you can both solve. Makes a big difference. The last bit of advice that I'll share is emotion often gets in the way of conflict. When we have emotion, it can interrupt the problem solving. So you need to find a way to express your emotion without offending the other person and getting in the way of your solving the problem. So that might mean you talk to a friend, it might mean you write down your emotions, but you want to try to come to the situation with the emotions handled. So thank you for that question. Another question that came up early is, what makes someone fail to listen or later lose interest in your communication? Thank you for that question. That was a question that came in a little earlier. One of the biggest things that you can do to keep people interested in what you're saying is to make it relevant to them, make it important to them. Many of us, again, as I mentioned, make the mistake of saying, here is what I want to say to you, rather than thinking about what does my audience need to hear, what's important for them. And if you can communicate your information so they understand what's important for them, they are more likely to pay attention. So the first thing is make sure you think about your audience so you can make your content relevant and important. That's number one. Number two, you need to change things up every so often. We as human beings get used to things. We habituate. When we see something that stays the same, we pay less attention to it. So if something changes, maybe in the variation of your voice, or putting up a slide and taking a slide away, or asking a question, or if you're virtual, having people do something with the reactions, that will keep people engaged. So make it relevant and make sure that you change things up periodically. Thank you. Ramisha says, Mike, how can we work on communication skills confidently? Oh, such an important question, Ramisha. I have spent much of my life trying to help people be more confident. I really, really encourage you to go to, in fact, I'm just going to show you. Let me just not tell you, let me show you. Give me just a second. So if you all were to go to my website, the No Freaking Speaking website, you will see that one of the topics that I cover is speaking anxiety. So if you go to this page, you are going to find a lot of resources, my book, a talk I gave, but you'll also find many other resources. And these resources are mine as well as others. Look at all these resources here. If you want to become a more confident speaker, this is a good place to go to start. There are lots of resources for you. So again, free, take advantage of them. It is my goal to help people be more confident in their communication. That's where it starts. Second, you have to practice. Third, you have to get feedback. So it's about having the information to be more confident, it's practicing, and it's getting feedback. If you do those things, you will get better at your communication. How can we communicate without manipulating one's beliefs and values? So I'm going to take that question to mean manipulating the other person's beliefs and values. I always believe we should be authentic and true to ourselves. So we speak our truth, what's important in our values. In terms of not manipulating others, I think it's important to just share your position and invite people to consider it without forcing them to take it on. So you might say, I am somebody who believes in this. Here are the reasons why I believe it. It is up to you to keep your current beliefs or to at least consider mine. So I'm not forcing people. I'm just giving them the information and how I see it, and then allowing people to make their own decision. So present it as information, not persuasion. So Techno says, how can one do away with stage fright? Go to that website, learn. There are many things you can do. When it comes to managing your anxiety on speaking, stage fright, it is about two things: managing the symptoms, what you feel, and then the sources, the things that actually initiate the anxiety. So when you go to manage this, watch some of my videos, go to that website, and I talk about how you can manage some of the symptoms and how you can manage some of the sources. Elite Women, that organization says, for keynote speaking or public speaking on platforms, what are the 3 topmost tips for communicating effectively and delivering with impact? Great question. And for those of you who are keynoting and speaking in front of a lot of others, congratulations. I think it comes down to what I've already said. Make sure you know your audience and what's important to them. Have a clear goal that you can focus all of your content on and structure it. That's the content piece. In terms of the delivery, make sure you practice, make sure you're confident in delivering it. Record yourself and watch your recording, very difficult to do, to see if you're coming off the way you want. Those are the ways to get better. You can convince a different person by, this is Rimsha's question, you first have to understand where they are in their beliefs and their attitudes. And then once you understand it, you have to invite them to change by providing them with information and sharing your point of view. So it again is all about understanding their perspective. And then there's some very specific techniques you can use to help persuade somebody. Again, those are on the website. For example, if you can link what you are saying to something somebody already believes, then you can likely get them to believe the new thing as well. So for example, imagine you are talking to somebody who supports some kind of cause. Maybe they support protecting the environment. And you know that about them, that they support protecting the environment. And you want them to help you go to sponsor you to go to some program that supports the environment. It becomes very easy to make that pitch because you know they already support the environment. So you could simply say, because you're such a strong supporter of the environment, I also believe in the environment. Would you mind providing some funds to help me take this class or go to this workshop? By connecting the two, by making it the person see that what you're asking for is consistent with what they already believe, it increases the likelihood of them helping you. How do you communicate effectively if the listener does not have a good command of the language? Aha, very, very important point. You will often be speaking to people for whom their first language is not the same first language as your own. One of the best things to do, and I have a whole podcast episode, I interviewed an expert on this, and what his advice was two things. One, do not try to be a native speaker. Speaking, you put too much pressure on yourself when you're trying to speak like a native speaker of the other language. Rather, do your best. So rather than trying to get it perfect, which only makes it more difficult to do well, just try your best. Second, repeat yourself in different ways. I don't know if you've noticed, but I repeat myself a lot. I'll say something and then I'll give an example of it, or I'll ask you a question about it. That's a way of repeating. So if somebody doesn't understand what I say the first time, when I repeat it in a different way, they might understand it. So when you're presenting, say something, and then maybe say it again by telling a story about that concept, or ask a question about it. So I hope that makes sense about how repetition can help. I want to pause for a second and have a reflection. Did you notice that I just said the same thing 6 times? I said repeat yourself 6 times in 6 different ways. That's what I mean. That's how you communicate when you don't all speak the same language the same way. Valentine says, how do you get your audience to be comfortable? Part of it is getting them engaged early, asking them to do things. When I asked you to count the F's, if you remember how I started, that activity served many purposes. Besides explaining that there are little things we have to pay attention to, it got you involved. It was intriguing, I hope. It was interesting and different. Those are all ways to get people interested and engaged. Think of some activity you can do, a question you can ask, a video you can show to get people involved. Stella says, I tend to forget. Forgetting is very common in nervous people in particular. One way to prevent forgetting is to really have a clear structure. If you think about it, a structure provides a map. It's hard to be lost if you have a map. So know your structure without memorizing. Memorizing actually works against you because part of your brain is focusing on what you've memorized, and that only leaves the other part to communicate. Rather, I'd like you to think about your main points and just talk about those main points. What I'll tell you is this: if you blank out, the single best way to get back on track is to repeat yourself. Many of us, it's just like if you were to lose something valuable to you. Let's say you lose your phone or your keys. How do you find them again? You retrace your steps. You go back and repeat what you did. The same thing is true with speaking. If you lose your place in what you're saying or forget, simply repeat what you just said and it will often get you back on track. Let me see. Another question about confidence. Again, speaking up without freaking. The book I wrote or the No Freaking Speaking site, very valuable, I hope, for you. Haria says, would understanding psychology and brain functions help? Absolutely. Absolutely. Understand anything that helps you understand your audience more is very, very helpful. If you're interested in this, again, the podcast I host, Think Fast, Talk Smart. I interview psychologists, I interview neuroscientists, all of this can help. So absolutely, anything you can do to learn more about people will help you. Oh, Brenda asks a very good question. What's the relationship between emotional intelligence and effective communication? So emotional intelligence is your ability to understand other people's perspective. It's mostly about empathy, understanding where somebody might be coming from. That's fundamentally critical to communication. In fact, some people believe we develop the ability to communicate to be able to connect and express empathy. So they're very related. How do you develop emotional intelligence? Well, you can study it. It's really about taking time to reflect, to listen and observe, and to really try to question why might somebody want or do what they're doing. So a lot of it is about thinking about the other person. It's all about empathy. Rebecca says she uses repetition, but sometimes I feel like it takes so much time. Yes, so it can take time, but if the goal is to really help somebody understand something, that is time well spent. Remember, you as a communicator are in service of your audience. You are there for them. And if the goal is to help them understand something, sometimes you have to repeat yourself a lot to help. Tioni says, is there a way to assess how effective your communication is? Yeah, see if you achieve your goal. So ask others. Achieving your goal is the single best way to assess your success. You have a goal, know, feel, do. At the end of your communication, do people know what you want them to know? Are they feeling what you want them to feel? Are they likely to do what you want them to do? So that goal not only helps you focus your messages, it's a way of assessing if you were effective or not. Sudi is saying, I have fear of speaking. How do I end that? You have to work on it and go to the No Freaking Speaking site and check out speaking anxiety. There are lots of tips, lots and lots of tips to help you do that. Are there ways to trick the brain, Haria says, into being more confident? Absolutely, that can help. And you do that by reviewing some of the techniques I talked about. Annette is, many of these questions are around speaking anxiety. The single best thing I can encourage you to do is to, again, go to the website. And in fact, I'm going to, I'll put the link again, but here are a whole bunch of articles and talks that you can use that are all designed to help you feel more comfortable and confident when you speak. So I understand that that's a challenge for many of you. I'll put it into the chat again. Go there, and if I've done my job right, you will have some help. Delefru says, how to raise motivation of students? What are the best effective ways? So if you're all about raising motivation, it's really, again, understanding who the audience is, what's important to them. And is there a way you can make your communication resonate with them so that they see the value in it? So when you're trying to motivate people, think about what is important for them and then talk about that. Valentina asks a question, can you create confidence for someone in communication? Yeah, I've spent my whole career doing it. You have to give people the tools, the time, and the compassion and the understanding. But yes, people can become more confident if they work at it and they leverage teachers and other folks. I'm going to wrap up now just because my time has come to an end. Again, I would like for all of you to consider the resources that I put into the chat. If you're on LinkedIn, link in with me. Please follow the work that I do. I am really all about helping people feel more comfortable and confident in their communication. It is my hope that as a result of what we've talked about today, that you will be in a better position to communicate effectively. You see my email address on the screen, and feel free to write me if you have specific further questions. Check out the website. You can actually subscribe to the website and the podcast. These are ways to help you communicate better. With that, I will simply say thank you. I do not know who is going to speak next, but thank you very much for this opportunity. I wish you all the best. I certainly wish you health and safety in the time ahead. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir, for this amazing session. And it was very useful for us today. And hope everyone got the utmost benefit from this session. And I wanted to say another thing, that I took this opportunity because I wanted to take off my fear of speaking. So yeah, thank you all for being here with SpunkGo. And thank you, sir.
Thank you.
For this amazing session.
Thank you very much. All the best.
Thanks, Matt. Have a great day.